It's early, it's 5:40 AM, and I'm taking the first bus of the morning over to the station. But it's worth the early start, because we're going for a day out. By Hovercraft. Let's go to the Isle of Wight. It's early on a Saturday morning, and I'm taking the train over to Stratford to ride an old vintage tube train. Not this one though, useful though the Jubilee line may be, this is just changing stations in London on the way to Waterloo. The more interesting tube comes a bit later on today. From London Waterloo, it's a direct train over to Portsmouth. It's a 1.5 hour journey over to Portsmouth and Southsea Station, first through the London suburbs and through Clapham Junction, that place where all the rails converge, until soon you're passing through Hampshire on the way to the coast. At Portsmouth and Southsea Station, there's a connecting bus called the Hover Bus from the station straight to the Hovercraft terminal. If your train ticket is to the Isle of Wight, routed via the Hover Travel service, then the trains, the connecting bus and the Hovercraft ride are all included. The bus takes you directly outside the Hovercraft terminal, and you just show your train ticket to the staff so that they can stamp it as used. You board the Hovercraft just outside the terminal, and there's level boarding. It also takes bikes for free, which is nice. This service from Southsea in Portsmouth to Ryde on the Isle of Wight started in 1965 as one of the world's first commercial passenger hovercraft services. It's now the world's last, but this service to the Isle of Wight is running regularly with modern hovercraft and it looks quite popular. There are good views over the Solent with Portsmouth, the Solent Forts and Ryde Pier coming into view, and all too soon we arrive at Ryde Hoverport. Ryde Esplanade train station is just across the footbridge, and here is the star of the show. The Isle of Wight's Island Line runs vintage tube trains, dating all the way back from 1938. It's not just a tourist attraction or a heritage steam railway either. The line is a full part of the National Rail network, so you can buy a ticket to one of these stations from any other National Rail station in Britain with rail cards and everything. These 82-year-old trains are the oldest in regular service on the entire National Rail network, but there's good reason why they're used. When the line's old steam trains were withdrawn in the 1960s, they couldn't replace them because there was a tunnel that was too small, and building new bespoke trains would have been far too expensive. They considered closing the entire line at that point, but just then, the London Underground had some old trains from the 1920s going spare, so they just used those here instead. Being tiny tube trains, they fitted into the tunnels just fine. Those original trains got replaced by the current 1938 ones in the 90s, but they're now running out of spare parts, so in turn these are about to be replaced by new old tube trains next year, one of which is already waiting in the depot. These ones ran on the District line just a few years ago. It's interesting to think of the Isle of Wight as being a kind of old people's home for tube trains to retire to. But I wasn't here just to ride the old tube trains, brilliant though they are. After a couple of buses over the hills, through the wonderfully quaint towns and villages, and along the coast, you get to the far western tip of the island. There's a scenic walk over to the famous Needles along the cliff, and for bonus points, try walking there on a very windy day, with sun, showers, and rainbows, and a bit of hail as well. At the end, there's an old fort built to defend the Solent ports from attack by the French, one of the Prime Minister Lord Palmerston's follies from the 1860s. France, under Napoleon III, and then after the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, actually ceased to be any real threat to British interests anyway, so these really were follies because, as soon as they were completed, they were pretty much obsolete. Even then, there were concerns that vibrations from firing the cannons at this old battery were causing the cliffs to crumble, so in 1895, a replacement was built further up on the cliff top, the new battery. In the 1950s and 60s, at the time of the space race, the UK did use this new battery site to test rockets. In 1971, it even launched the Prospero satellite on the Black Arrow rocket, tested right here on the Isle of Wight, and became the 6th country to develop an independent capability to launch satellites into space. Immediately afterwards, though, it became the only country ever to give up this capability. The US had promised Britain access to their rockets instead, but then after the Black Arrow project was cancelled, they just turned around and said no. The UK can now launch satellites as a member of the European Space Agency, but who knows how much longer the UK will stay in that. Anyway, the entire area is now a National Trust site with free entry and a tea room. It's been an excellent day out. Now isn't really the time to visit anymore, given that it's, well, winter 2020, but once the current situation is over, you can get a normal train ticket from your local station to Shanklin on the Isle of Wight via either the Wight Link ferry or via the Hovercraft. There are then regular and very scenic buses between Shanklin and Newport, and between Newport and the Needles landmark. There are quite a few other ferry services to the island as well, some of which are closer to the Needles, but then you miss out on the Hovercraft and the old tube trains. I hope you've enjoyed this video of Hovercraft and of vintage tubes and windswept scenery, and thanks for watching.